Is the pressure of competition something we all feel the same way, or does our reaction really shift depending on the situation?
That's a great question.
We're going to explore some, well, frankly, fascinating research today that might surprise you about how competition affects us.
Yeah, from like first-time skydivers to, believe it or not, competitive ballroom dancers.
Exactly. And as we get into these ideas, just a reminder that our YouTube channel has mindful moments.
Oh yeah, those are great.
They're AI-powered analyses of books designed to help you reflect, think critically about topics just like this one.
It's really quite remarkable, isn't it? How differently our minds and our bodies respond to different kinds of pressure.
You think extreme activities, you think peak stress, right?
Right. But the research shows, well, it's much more nuanced. It's quite eliminating, actually.
Okay, so let's start with this skydiving experiment in Germany. Renate Deinzer, right?
Yes, Steinzer. She wanted to understand the body's stress response in a truly high-stakes situation.
So she studied 16 first-time skydivers. 16, measuring their biochemical reactions.
Right before and right after the jump. Saliva samples, looking for hormonal changes.
Yeah.
You know, what happens when you're intensely stressed.
And she found a significant psychoendocrine response.
That's the term, yeah. The link between the brain and hormones under stress, their bodies were just flooded with stress hormones.
Which makes sense, I mean, for skydive.
Totally intuitive. But then you've got Stephen Lang's work, which adds a twist.
He was a jump pilot, right? Back in the 80s, studying edge work.
Exactly, pushing human boundaries. And he noticed experienced skydivers, they didn't consistently show those same massive hormonal surges.
So they adapt quickly.
Remarkably quickly, it seems, to, falling through the sky.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting. Let's pivot to ballroom dancing.
A very different arena. Researcher Rawlater studied dancers, 3 groups based on experience.
Less than 80 competitions, over 80, and then the real masters, over 173 comps. Some with more than 10 years of constant competing.
So you'd expect these pros, these masters, to be cool as cucumbers, right? Unfazed.
You would, but the finding was, well, surprising.
Even the master dancers showed stress responses, hormonal responses, similar to those novice skydivers.
Wow.
Really? Which strongly suggests the physical act, the dancing itself, wasn't the main stressor.
Especially when you think back to the experienced skydivers who didn't have that same hormonal rush anymore.
Exactly. Roder figured the key difference wasn't physical risk or demand. It was the psychological environment.
So the judgment, the competition itself.
Precisely. The first-time skydivers were facing their own fear. The expert dancers, they were being judged constantly. Winning, losing, that was the stressor.
The evaluation, not the waltz.
Not the waltz. It really highlights that, years of practice, while essential for skill, don't automatically make you immune to the stress of competition.
Right.
The book really explores how success in these pressure cookers involves managing that psychoendocrine response, maybe even harnessing it.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about those times you felt immense pressure to perform, even when you knew your stuff.
Definitely. And this study suggests that feeling, it might not just disappear with experience if you're in a competitive setting.
So practice isn't everything?
Not when it comes to the pressure. And this actually connects to a really interesting historical idea from the ancient Greeks.
Oh!
Yeah, the concept of aridas. Basically, the pursuit of excellence through competition.
Okay.
And originally, it wasn't just about winning. It was tied to religious demonstrations of, worthiness. Athletes were almost embodying divine traits through their efforts.
So the original Olympics weren't just sports.
Far from it. They were religious festivals. Athletes aimed to show their absolute best, proving their worthiness almost to the gods.
Wow.
Competition was seen as this powerful way to bring out your best. It fostered honor, valor, even between rivals. Achievements gained meaning within that contest.
That's a really different way to think about competition. Not just a game, but striving for your absolute potential.
Exactly.
So let's dig into what actually lights that competitive fire. The book uses this amazing example, a 46-second athletic achievement.
Yes, and it's a perfect illustration of how the dynamics of the situation are crucial for peak performance.
It wasn't just talent.
Not solely, no. It was the tight race, a fierce rival pushing them, feeling like the underdog, the crowd's energy, even past failures fueling the drive. It all came together.
It seems like competition can just jolt us into action, right? Even if we weren't looking for it, just knowing you're being compared.
It activates something primal. And it definitely complicates that simple extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation idea.
How so?
Well, traditional thinking often paints competition as driven by external rewards, prizes, status.
Right.
But the book argues, and the evidence suggests, that for many people, competing itself is inherently fun. It adds enjoyment.
Like the elite distance runner study.
Exactly. The ones competing at the highest level also showed the strongest intrinsic motivation. And even ROTC cadets, they actually grew to like rifle shooting more through team competitions.
So it's not always an outside pressure. It can actually boost internal drive.
It absolutely can. But of course, stepping into that arena means taking risks.
Always.
And whether we take those risks often depends on what we're focusing on, right? The potential gains or the actual odds of winning.
The book calls it gain-oriented versus prevention-oriented.
That's it. And these biases really shape whether someone decides to even compete at all.
And this connects to gender differences you mentioned?
It does. Research points to women tending to enter fewer competitions than men, but it's not necessarily about being more risk-averse.
Oh, what is it then?
It seems often linked to men showing more, overconfidence, which might make them less aware of the actual risks.
So they jump in more often, maybe without fully weighing the odds?
That seems to be part of the picture. Doesn't guarantee more success, though, just more participation sometimes.
Interesting nuance. Okay, what about how other people influence us? Social factors.
Right. Triplets' early work is key here. The cyclists.
They went faster racing each other than against the clock.
That's what he observed. He figured the competitor released some kind of nervous energy, stimulating instinct.
And he did that experiment with kids too, right? The competition machine.
He did. And the results were all over the place. About half the kids did better competing, a quarter were unaffected, and a quarter actually did worse.
So competition doesn't affect everyone the same way?
Not at all. It really underscores individual differences.
And the book also stresses that for that competitive drive to stick, the contest has to feel winnable, right?
Absolutely crucial. Whether it's the Air Force Academy, sales contests, SATs, the research is consistent. If you think you have a real shot, you try harder.
But if the field is huge and winning seems impossible,
motivation drops. That's the N effect Garcia and Tor described. More competitors N can actually lead to worse individual performance.
Why is that?
It feels less personal, maybe. Competing against a few rivals feels like a direct test of you. In a massive crowd, that feeling gets diluted.
That makes sense. It feels less like my effort matters as much. What about established rivalries, like Harvard-Yale?
Oh yeah, rivalry cranks up the intensity dial way up. The game is a classic example. Underdogs often pull off upsets just because of that deep-seated rivalry.
It's like competition squared.
Pretty much. And you see it in business, too. Fierce company rivalries drive innovation and effort.
And the book brings up the Matthew effect. How does that fit in?
Yes. Coined by Robert Merton. Basically, early success often attracts more resources, more advantages. So initial leaders tend to pull further ahead over time.
The rich get richer, kind of.
In a competitive context, yes. You see it in education, sports, business. That early advantage can snowball.
Okay, let's shift to the environment. Situational factors. Home advantage.
Definitely a factor. And the book points out some specifics. It seems stronger when the outcome's uncertain, early in a game, or even if the home team falls behind.
Interesting.
And things like territorialism, that feeling of this is my turf, can also subtly shape how we compete.
And what about performing for an audience? How does that play out?
Zajanc's research suggests generally an audience ramps up arousal, motivation, but it's not always helpful.
Oh, for who?
For novices, people still learning. A supportive audience can actually feel like evaluation, be distracting. Experts, though, they often benefit. Scrutiny, even criticism, can help them refine.
So it depends on your skill level. Makes
Right.
sense. And the stakes obviously matter hugely.
Hugely. Look at the Daytona 500. The massive difference in prize money between finishing, say, first versus fifth.
Yeah, huge incentive.
Absolutely. Economists found NASCAR drivers take significantly more risks when the prize money is higher. Money talks, or rather, motivates risk.
It really is a complex mix. Let's get into the biology now. The COMT gene.
Right, the COMP gene. It's fascinating because it affects how we handle dopamine, which is crucial for performance under pressure.
And this leads to the warrior versus worrier idea.
Exactly. Warriors clear dopamine faster. They tend to excel under immediate threat, needing peak performance now. Warriors clear it slower, often better at complex planning, thinking things through.
And counterintuitively, the worriers might actually be closer to aggression.
Yeah, closer to the trigger for aggression, though maybe less effective at channeling it than warriors, who interpret threats differently.
And this even affects things like PTSD risk.
The research suggests worriers might be more vulnerable after trauma than warriors. Shows how deep these biological predispositions can run.
It really does. And it's not just biology, it's how we interpret the stress.
Massively important.
Yeah.
That study with the students. One group told it was a threat, the other an intellectual challenge questionnaire.
Same test.
Identical test. The threat group performed significantly worse. Framing is powerful. It really underlines why learning how to compete, how to handle the stress, is so vital.
And gender comes back into play here too, doesn't it? Beyond just ability.
It does. Look at politics. Women win elections just as often as men when they run.
So the key is getting them to run in the first place.
That seems to be a major factor. Research on state legislators found ambitious men often run even with a slim chance. Ambitious women tend to wait for a good chance, maybe around 20% odds.
So a different calculation of risk versus reward again?
Seems like it. And you see echoes elsewhere. That chess study. Elite women less likely to use risky, aggressive openings, preferring predictable wins.
And the math challenge experiments
Showed women were less likely to opt into winner-take-all tournaments, even when performing just as well as the men in non-competitive settings.
But subtle cues can change that.
Right. Prime women with family stuff, more reluctance. Prime them with professional goals. They might compete more than men. It's complex.
Definitely not just about ability. Okay, what about the competitive environment itself? Can it backfire?
Jackson's research hints at that. Boys in elite, high-competition schools might actually suffer academically in some areas, the small fish, big pond idea.
But girls in the same setting benefit.
They tend to, yeah. Maybe better at leveraging resources, asking for help. The book also warns about overcompeting. Always seeing winners and losers can just wear you down psychologically.
And our childhoods obviously play a huge role in shaping this.
Absolutely. Think about the Robbers Cave experiment. Competition fueled conflict between those boys' groups initially.
But then cooperation emerged.
When they were given shared goals, they had to work together on. Also, group competition is different from one-on-one dynamics where you might focus more on common ground.
And sibling rivalry.
An early, if messy, training ground. And things like group play, roughhousing, especially important perhaps for girls who might get less of it, can build competitive fire.
Okay, one last biological bit, the finger ratio, 2D.4D.
Yes. The ratio of index finger to ring finger length. Some research links a lower ratio, suggesting more prenatal testosterone exposure to things like entrepreneurial success, maybe more risk-taking.
But it's not destiny, right?
Definitely not. Biology might be, say, 50%. Childhood, environment, choices are hugely important too.
This has been incredibly rich. Competition is just woven through so many layers. Psychology, society, biology, how we frame things.
It really is. And hopefully, exploring this helps you think about the competitive parts of your own life. You know, what drives you. The thrill of victory. Or maybe avoiding loss.
Yeah, understanding that could really shift your approach.
Absolutely.
Well, for more discussions like this, please do subscribe to our podcasts.
And check out Mindful Moments on the YouTube channel. Great resources there for deeper thinking.
Definitely. If you found this useful, share with someone else who might be interested. You can find links to related books and resources with this recording.
And keep thinking critically, right?
Yeah.
About these forces that shape how we strive, how we compete.